Hi, hello.
For real.
YouTube. We're back. Hello, YouTube. This is the Short Code Podcast. This week, we are here with Corbin Weaver.
Hello.
We are here with Emily White.
Hello.
We are here with Nicole Westergaard, and we're here with Tony Rosenberg. Okay. So this week, an article caught my eye on the Annals of Internal Medicine website, dealing with, basically it was a article written anonymously. Actually, it was an article submitted by a medical educator submitting that, or admitting that he too has been
privy to.
He has been part of objectionable things in medicine, objectionable activity in medicine. So we discussed a similar case in episode 87 of an anesthesiologist saying terrible things about her patient. And so when I saw this, I sort of came back to it as something we should talk about. So the article, it's contains two stories of shocking behavior with patients who are under the knife. This particular medical educator was a medical humanities class with some students, a small group, I guess, asking whether the students had anyone to forgive from their clinical experiences or who they couldn't forgive. And one student stepped forward to say that he was with a surgeon who was cleaning the vaginal area of an anesthetized patient. The surgeon turned to him, winked, and said, "I bet she's enjoying this." The professor and the student said this was, unforgivable. I think that's pretty understandable. You're taking advantage of somebody who is anesthetized, under the knife. I mean, this is a very vulnerable person. The professor responded by admitting, and I'm under the impression that it was something that he hasn't talked about, admitting by telling his own story from his medical school days of a joke he took part in with a doctor who had saved a Hispanic woman's life after she began bleeding out during a hysterectomy, and after a vaginal birth, and who then began dancing and singing La Cucaracha while his hand was inside her vagina. This was a Hispanic patient, while his hand was inside her vagina. And he felt some social pressure to laugh and even join in, although my sense is that it was reluctant. The anesthesiologist in this case was the good guy, jumped in and told him to knock it off. And so, I gather that there was some debate with the editors, among the editors, should we publish this story? Should we not publish this story? Does this make us look bad? Is this an important conversation to have? And ultimately they decided, quote, "We hope that medical educators and others will use this essay as a jumping off point for discussions that explore the reasons why physicians sometimes behave badly and brainstorm strategies for handling these ugly situations in real time." So, let's do that. How will you handle bad behavior by superiors in real time? Corbin?
Yeah, well, so I was thinking that the thing that's hard that makes these situations extremely difficult, especially in the medical profession, besides, these things are hard in real life in general, but is that the culture around our profession is just so hierarchical. It matters what you've done and who you are and what title you have, and for medical students and interns and everyone up and down the ladder, it matters what your superiors think of you. On a rotation, if you think you want to go into surgery and you don't, you have an issue with your surgeon ahead of you who might be doing something questionable, do you call them out when you need honors in this rotation if you want to literally do this for the rest of your life? But I think when you also think about it more in-depthly, what makes these stories so shocking, because the question is, as medical professionals, are we held to a different standard, and should we be held to a higher standard? Is that in some ways I think we should be, because in society, us as medical professionals are given the privilege to be let into people's lives, and are given the privilege to be with someone when they're at their most vulnerable. And when you take advantage of that, it's shocking. When someone's literally helpless, anesthetized on a table,
in your care.
In your care.
And they expect you.
Right, they've trusted you,
Right.
and they've said, you know what, I'm going to be the most vulnerable I could possibly be to someone I don't even know because you have sworn to take care of me.
Right.
And that's why it's so shocking when things like this happen. And that's why we should take it extremely seriously. But that doesn't make it any, it's really easy to compartmentalize that reality from the reality of, oh, my future and my doctor, and oh, this is an awkward social situation. So...
Yeah. I feel like that's part of the reason it's so, because like we wouldn't need doctors if people knew what to do, and so to warp in any way or be dishonest in any way, and I think dishonesty comes in two forms. It's like outright lying, but I think we need to talk about this stuff because I feel like you're doing a double like violation to the people that you've done wrong to by not talking about it. Like when we don't talk about, for example, like how we got the smallpox vaccine because Edward Jenner injected a child, an 8-year-old child. That was the garden son. That you have to talk about it because otherwise you're just completely not honoring the people that you've already violated.
So the idea here is to sort of develop a strategy. My mom keeps calling me.
Hi, Mom.
Mom, I love you.
Is she listening?
I don't know. No, she's not listening. Yeah, maybe she's calling in. What's the strategy that you would consider when you're confronted with this?
I think for me, it just brings up the interesting perspective that I think as physicians, we should be held to a higher standard, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that there aren't physicians who make questionable remarks or questionable comments. And for me, it's kind of a reminder that even as medical professionals, we're still human beings.
Right.
Yes.
And I think the admissions process tries to weed those people out, but it's fallible.
Right.
People with questionable ethics or questionable standards will continue to become physicians, even though the admissions process is very strictly against that. And I think for me, I completely recognize the fact that these people are responsible for, writing, they're responsible for grading me. But I think I have to remind myself that certain things have to transcend ego.
Right.
That, of course, there's that hierarchy, but in certain times, it's like, even if all that I do is not to respond to what they're doing and just to stand there and not do anything, is better than faking, or going along with it. Because I don't think that everyone would be comfortable to say, hey, what you're doing is making me uncomfortable, or calling them out, but sometimes just passively standing there and not engaging is just as valuable.
And perhaps that's the downfall of the hierarchy, right? Like if you don't actively just be passive, I mean, like you can like not engage with them, and I think that's also intervening. But it's, we construct the system.
Well, going off that hierarchy, I mean, if you have that hierarchy in place, you see so much of it in our medical education for medicine and society we have for mass. We see all this going towards us, and I think you also need to, as the professional community, you need to have that going to the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
That same type of thing, while it may seem like it's automatic, you should just know it. If you're having that training and you're deeming it important enough for medical students, you need to have that coming from the top-down approach as well. So you need to have that in there. So if a student doesn't feel empowered enough and they feel like it would jeopardize their future professionally to say something, you also need those who maybe didn't have that indoctrinated into their training. They need to be aware of it as well, so maybe they have more of a position of power to actually say something.
I think also what's an important point about this kind of example is that like these situations are like blatant and shocking and really terrible, like obviously, but there's like tons of like tiny little ways that healthcare professionals act inappropriately all day that aren't like like making a absurd sexual comment. It could just be like kind of like making a backhanded comment about someone's weight,
Right.
And that kind of thing happens all the time. And it's like in some way, what do they call it, the silent curriculum or whatever, that's like and I think those are also important because it's so easy to become, I think in this work, to become jaded about what you see every day because hard things happen and people use kind of like off-color humor to like get through it, but you have to realize that that's not appropriate, you know,
and that you're talking about.
Yeah, and you have to realize that, you know, good people hopefully can do things that aren't appropriate and that it's a wake-up call for all of us to check our behavior, you know, and how we treat people.
Well, Nicole, it's like what you said before on the portion of the show that the YouTube listeners are not going to be able to enjoy. But you said something about, you know, your past as an EMT.
Yeah, and there's been quite a few of those where it's a very high stress environment. I've been an EMT for about 6 years, small town of about 850. Everyone knows everybody, and you know, if you get a really bad accident or you get a small kid or anything like that, it gets very stressful, and sometimes we break this up with humor. And I know it's not the most professional things in the world, but there's EMT slang that we use that I would definitely get docked a few points on professional for using them. But like individuals who have motorcycles, I ride a motorcycle, so I really don't like this term just because it's a little blatant, but individuals who don't wear helmets and they crash, we call them crayons. Yeah. Because that's extremely unprofessional. It's a person. Right. And sometimes, I don't know, it's you're also human, so you have to consider that maybe we're using humor a little bit inappropriately to cope, but it's not the correct coping mechanism.
I just want to break in here as a motorcycle rider. YouTubers, if you live in a state where helmets are not required, wear your helmet.
Yes. And wear jeans, too. I mean, you don't, long sleeves, too.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, that's
like,
your
do you think
public
that the humor
safety
part,
announcement.
The humor part comes from us not like, it feels like people in medicine, this is an overgeneralization completely, but like the feel-goody stuff, you know, talking about your emotions, like we're coping via, like, because you're still considered kind of like a strong, non-emotional person if you are being sarcastic about something, you know what I mean? So like, I feel like in part, and I've heard, you know, already a few people say, you know, like, oh, that's just the feel-goody stuff when we're talking about like medicine and society or stuff like that, which I think is not good because I think it should be, especially with burnout, like with physician burnout, we're not robots. Like you said, we're human. And I think the higher standard comes not, I think that you can't say that physicians know everything, right? Like, because we have the media that makes it seem like, oh, you have this weird, strange blood clot. I know what that is, and I know exactly where that is, and I'm going to get it out. But, like, we don't have answers all the time. But ethically, I think we need to have that higher standard.
And I think in a way, like, this kind of gets at the point that I was talking at a bit ago about how to properly merge personality and professionalism. And to be able to recognize that certain things I might say joking around with friends outside of a professional work environment, maybe I shouldn't say that at work or, you know, when I'm doing a rotation, but where to draw that line, because, you know, personally I am a very sarcastic person. I like to have like back and forth banter with people.
We banter a lot.
Do you banter? Oh, we banter something.
Good.
Yeah, something fierce, yeah. But I think that it's important for me anyway that when I become a physician I can be myself and let that come into my work, but at the same time to recognize where that line is. And I think in certain circumstances it could get confusing. These two examples were blatantly over the line, but I think certain other things, you know, might have a little bit more of a hard time figuring out, is that okay or is that not okay?
And I think the other thing maybe to think about is, what if I do something like this? You know, what if I screw up? Something pops out of my mind. We all think things that we wouldn't say out loud. And every once in a while, the social filter goes away, and it comes out, right? So probably a good idea to have
word vomit.
Yes.
There's like a book called The Mindful Medical Student. I know that's like really cliche to like read a book about this, but anyway, they say
you're so lame.
You know, I'm sorry. But like asking yourself, like look in the mirror, and it's like, whose words am I using? Like, would I like that I'm using these words, or like maybe externalizing it? So like, if I saw someone else doing this, like, how would I react to that? Because sometimes it's hard to be critical of yourself just because you don't really think about it. But I think that self-reflection is just so important because it can go unnoticed, like those things that you don't verbalize, you know, like just to like, okay, Okay.
Oh no, I just.
Oh, you're waving.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to do is to, you're going to immediately recognize probably when you've said something inappropriate,
Right.
and just say, you know what, that was totally inappropriate. I'm an a-hole.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, I mean, that's just generally super hard to, I think also for us, maybe it's really hard to admit when you're wrong, and it's really hard to admit when you're wrong when you're supposed to be smart and kind and compassionate. You're like, guess what?
Yeah.
I was acting like a tool.
Yeah.
I think that,
Well, I mean, I think it would speak volumes about somebody. For me, it would speak volumes about somebody if they came to me later and said, I messed up.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that happens. Think about how often that happens.
I think it's interesting for me because I'm a very non-traditional medical student, so I'm 27, and I haven't, always been successful. I've had a lot of failures in my past that a lot of medical students haven't had or haven't had to work
I've had
through.
those. I've
had
had
lots
failures.
of failures.
Oh, you just gonna leave me there?
Oh, I didn't know you were
Thank
going
you.
for
Oh,
it.
I was raising my hand.
Failures? Yeah.
Oh, we were just raising our hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for me,
Traditional.
it's like that was part of the process that got me here, was recognizing those shortcomings that I had and reflecting on them and making them right where I could. And I think it's not realistic to think that we're going to go our entire professional career and not say something we regret or not
Right.
offend someone. It's
Right.
like that's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when it's going to happen.
It's been about a week for me, so that's good.
A week?
A week.
You don't necessarily want to hear some of the mnemonics that I make up.
No, we don't. Keep those inside, my
Mine
friend.
make no sense.
Mine make me laugh, so.
Oh, that's actually a funny story. So this summer I was in Niger, and we weren't there on like a mission, like with a organization, but the organization that we happened to be working with was a Christian organization, and there's a medical student there. And she's trying to learn the cranial nerves in English, and she goes, "Oh, do you have a mnemonic in English for me?"
Oh boy.
And the cranial nerve one is I'm not just Google it. It's the most common one.
We've talked about it on the show. In the
But
past.
I was like, mnemonics don't really work for me. He just walked away.
The one med student in the world that says that.
Yeah, I was like,
That's funny.
no.
Cranial nerve.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a second on the Short Code Podcast.
There are many cranial nerves that can be memorable and rude.
The hand bone one.
What?
I laugh every time.
There's a hand